This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Tider. I have a special guest today, and I know I say it almost every time because for me every guest feels very special. But around half a year ago, I somehow ended up having a whole line of interviews with ladies who did not have very good relationships with their mothers. This is a topic that for me feels very strange because I had a very loving relationship with my mom. But on the other hand, I always, from the very beginning on, felt like this podcast should not be a glorification of our mothers, but we should really talk about who are our mothers and what do we learn from them and why, and what do we wish they were able to teach us. So I always am very excited when I have a guest who is willing to talk about her complicated relationship with her mother. And I started working with this topic and started preparing the Thank You Mama workshop, the first one, which will be held in 2 weeks, and I'm very excited about it. And again, I wanted to avoid it being glorification of our mothers, but face the relationships that were not so good. So for me, a way to learn about this, as I always do, is go buy books, read books about a topic. And one of the first books I came across and bought and read and absolutely loved is Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters, A Guide for Separation, Liberation, and Inspiration by Karen C.L. Anderson, who is my guest today. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Anna.
I'm so excited you're here.
I am so very excited to be here.
Because this is such an important topic for me. And as I mentioned, and we already talked about it, for me, it doesn't come organically because I had such a loving relationship with my mom. So I am still a learner and I'm still exploring what it means to have not such a good relationship with your mom. And I'm very glad that women like you write about their experiences and guide other women to, as you nicely put it, liberate themselves from this.
Yeah. As I was listening to you talk in the intro there, I was thinking about a quote that popped into my mind, and I'm trying to remember who it was who said it. But the quote is, "I'd rather be whole than good." Mm-hmm. And it's probably from some psychologist back in the 1940s or something. But what I was thinking is, this in regards to women in general, right, is that whether we're mothers or daughters or both, we are women and we're not so one-dimensional, right? We multitudes, as they say. And, so I'm really glad that you had such a loving relationship with your mom. My relationship has been more of a struggle, but it isn't only bad. Right? Mm-hmm. It's a whole WHOLE experience, right? It is not just all bad or all good. It's whole in the way that it is. And I think that is something that is important to say.
Yes. Karen, before we jump into the topic, I'd like to introduce you and your work a little more. So you are a life coach.
Yes.
And you're also a book author. You wrote and published other books. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your professional background?
It's interesting. I became a life coach in 2013, and I've done a few certifications since then. And prior to all of that, I was a writer. I'm still a writer, but I made a living as a writer prior to that in a variety of different ways. And at one point, I spent nearly 20 years as a plastics industry trade magazine journalist.
Oh, wow.
And that's why I was in Vienna at one point in my life, was to visit a manufacturer of robots. Yeah. So the life coaching has come later in my life. It's sort of like as life happened, things that personally that were going on in my life that I was struggling with, one of which was my relationship with my mother, was sort of happening at the same time that I was pursuing life coaching. And it became pretty obvious to me that, especially given, the people that I was attracting into my coaching practice often had troubles in their relationship with their moms. And it just occurred to me that, okay, this is what I'm meant to be doing. I am meant to be working with women around this issue. And I definitely want to clarify that I am not a therapist. And so, in my practice, we do a lot of talk about boundaries and talk about identity and talk about working on, how we can remother ourselves. But it is very different from therapy. I just wanted to make that distinction, because a lot of times the mother issue is a subject for therapy as well.
Mm-hmm. So this is how the book happened.
That's how the book happened. Yes.
The best things always happen so organically. I love that in life. One thing leads to the other, and then they happen just by themselves. And the book was the book was a big hit. I saw today. I looked it up again. It had 900 reviews on Amazon, as much as I can see, and
wow.
Many, many, many people, as I did, feel like it was a gift to them. It in the one shape or the other form. It improved their lives, and especially their relationships with their moms. And do we want to tell our listeners, or my listeners, and we can cut it out if we decide not to, but I would be very excited about that we just, before we started recording, we started dreaming of a joint workshop, of a joint Thank You Mama and Difficult Moms workshop. In Vienna, maybe one day. That would be very fun.
Yeah, I am putting that out to the universe too.
Let's do
that. Karen, don't erase this part.
No, okay, let's not. Let's send it out. But this is how Thank You Mama workshop happened. Also, talking to one of my guests. She's an art historian and a Zen priestess in Vienna, and we started talking, and I interviewed her, and somehow through the interview we spontaneously dreamt of a workshop, and this workshop is happening now in 2 weeks. So yes, let's put it out there. Okay. Karen, before we jump into talking about Mama, because this book matters to me so much and I'd like to share it with my listeners, do you want to tell me or us more about the book?
It is a love note to women in general. And even though the title has the term difficult mother in it, and even though it has the word separation in it, I want to be very clear that this isn't coming from a place of anger or resentment or trying to throw my mother under the bus or, blame or any of that. And the more that I do this work, what I see and recognize, and I do talk about this in the book a little bit, is that difficult mother-daughter relationships don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in the context of patriarchy and misogyny and white supremacy and other systems of oppression, so to speak. And in a world where women aren't valued equally, that is, to me, that is why so many, I think, mothers and daughters struggle. It's not just that there's a bunch of, bad women out there who are terrible mothers. And so, but at the same time, right, when you write a book, as you know, probably, that, your title needs to grab attention. And so that's why difficult mothers is the title of the book. And then also just wanting to explain the word separation here, that for some women, not having contact with their mothers is absolutely the right choice, and it can be made in a very empowering way. But the separation that I talk about is more the emotional separation of understanding who you are separate from her. And, where do you start or where does she end and where do you start? Right? As two separate autonomous women. And so that I just wanted to explain that part of the title.
I'm very glad that you actually covered what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to say, because I was nervous when I took the book into my hands, because maybe separation scared me a little and difficult marriage. But what I really loved about the book is, as you say, it doesn't, some of these books I read about difficult mother-daughter relationships were very angry towards the mothers, the difficult mothers. And I did not feel that at all in your book. And I loved that about it. That it, as you said, it comes from a place of love towards all women and tries to remind us that our difficult mothers had a reason, their own reason, and now we can talk about personal histories or patriarchy or the way women were treated for millennia at this stage. But just to try and see where our mothers come from, this is why I always start my interviews with talking about our mothers' lives. This is why I want to hear the mother's life story, because the lessons we learn or don't learn are very directly derived from these lives and circumstances. But what I also loved about the book, as you said, is this aspect of taking responsibility. What you say, separating, for me, this emotional separation for me is taking responsibility in a way for yourself.
Yes.
And very beautifully discussing this topic of remothering and how you can give yourself what your mom maybe was not able to give you. And this is something I would be very excited if we could cover in our future workshops together.
Yes.
I want to quote you now for a second. For me, a very important thing was you said, "Through years of trial and error, here's what I have learned about remothering. It's the ultimate in self-care. It's not about bubble baths and pedicures, although it can include them. It's the deliberate practice of acknowledging, honoring, and meeting your needs and preferences as you define them, or making sure they get met in a healthy, independent way, not in a dysfunctional, codependent, enmeshed way." Meaning it's your responsibility. Thank you for writing those. Those inspired me deeply. Let's talk about your mom.
Okay, let's do it.
What is her name?
Her first name is Cynthia.
Cynthia. Tell me about Cynthia and her life.
So my mom is still alive. Mm-hmm. She will be 82 in August. Mm-hmm. She was born in 1940. She was the first of 3 children born to her mother and father. And I have to say that my mother and her mother also had a very, very troubled relationship. She also had a troubled relationship with her father. And again, I want to just acknowledge that I don't know if what I'm sharing is 100% true. And I want to say that the way that I share it intentionally this way because I like how I feel when I speak about it this way, if that makes sense, right? So,
but this is also what you talk about in the book. You mentioned somewhere how we all tell these narratives and stories in and about our lives, but we can become victims of them. We can put ourselves in a place where we don't feel good about them, and when we put ourselves in a victim position. And you talk about how you can change narratives into a form that liberates us, and this is exactly what you're.
Yes, exactly. And another thing that since that book came out, that book is, I think, about 4 years old now. I have learned a lot about trauma and the nervous system since that book came out. And so what I'm going to share here reflects that. But I suspect, based on what I've heard from my own mother and from others who know her, and people, family members who watched her grow up, that she experienced trauma at a very young age. And I don't know exactly what it was. I have some inkling. I suspect that my grandmother never really wanted to have children, or at least not the way she did when she did. She was fairly young. It is also suspected, but I don't know if this is true, that my grandmother was sexually abused as a child. So we have, now sort of set a stage of childhood trauma. And I think my grandmother was very emotionally neglectful. And what's interesting is that, as I said, my mom was born in, I think I said she was born in 1940. And the parenting advice was quite not what we would want today, especially. I mean, it's, make the baby, don't hold the baby, don't love the baby, make them go to sleep by themselves, don't spoil the baby. It was like basically training an animal to behave. I think my grandmother, what she wanted was a baby that would, she could just sort of put it away when she wanted to and not have to deal with it. And I think she also wanted to be an actress or a model. That's the story, is that she would have preferred to probably not get married and go live a life in Hollywood or something. But so now here she has this very needy baby, right? Like, of course, babies need. So I think that's where I see the seeds of childhood trauma in my mom's life. So fast forward to my mom being in high school, and she is voted, I think, the prettiest and most popular girl in her high school class. And she goes to college in the late 1950s. And while at college, she meets a boy named Johnny McIntyre, and she falls in love with Johnny. But she flunks out of her first year of college because, as the story used to go, and my grandfather would say, because she majored in bridge and boys.
Yeah.
So she comes back from college, probably angry and ashamed, and gets a job, meets my father, and gets married. Mm-hmm. It's very touching to me to think about mom, who I know to be a very, very intelligent, spirited, bold kind of person, who probably wanted something very different from her life than what she got. Kind of like my grandmother, right? Mm-hmm. Women, this is what you do. You get married and you have kids right away.
And kind of like so many women during the whole history. This is just generally women's history.
Yes. So there's my mom, right? She marries my dad when she's 19. They had me in 1962, which means I'm going to be 60 this year.
Congratulations.
And then, their marriage was falling apart. My mom didn't want anything to do with it. She didn't really respect or like my father. And so she got on an airplane at age 25. And this would have been in 1965-ish. And she flew to Mexico by herself to get a quickie divorce, because divorce wasn't legal here in Connecticut, where she lived. I don't know if it was difficult, or I don't remember if it was legal or not, but it was something that I knew that she felt like the easiest, quickest thing to do would be to go to Mexico. And when I think about a young woman, right, flying by herself at that age, at that time, to Mexico to get a divorce, I just think, gee, what a badass.
Wow. Did she have only you, or did she have more children at this stage?
No, she just had me. Mm-hmm. At that point, I think when I think about my own, sort of emotional or childhood traumas, and again, this is not things that mothers aren't doing this on purpose, right? My mother is not an evil person, but she was a young woman who needed and wanted to live her own life, and she had to work. And as I said, she was very bold and very independent. And so I kind of was, I don't want to say pushed to the side, but in my early years, I didn't really have family, or I didn't have siblings. I didn't have really friends or other family around. So I was kind of lonely as a little girl. Yeah. And
then she went back to college.
Yeah. So she then married my stepfather when I was 5. And then my mother and stepfather adopted a little boy who was 9 months younger than me. So I was 9 when they adopted him, and he was 8. And when I was in middle school, which is, 12, 13, 14 in that time frame. She did go back to college and got her degree and graduated with honors. She really did accomplish quite a bit. I remember her in those years. She wanted to do a lot of travel, and she did. Actually, after she divorced my stepfather, she traveled for a year.
Where were you at that time?
I was already an adult. I was out of college and working and doing my thing. So, yeah. But yeah, she instilled in me. And I don't know if this is going to be mixing things up by talking about some of the things she taught me, but I flew by myself when I was 6, and I was taking a train to visit my dad when I was 12. And as soon as I got my driver's license at 16, I was driving myself anywhere. So that, and having traveled by myself since then has been something that I think she really instilled in me. And I appreciate that very much.
Mm-hmm. So what happened to her after she traveled for a year?
She came back. I guess I'll throw in here that at one point, this was actually before she took this trip. She dated a man who was much, much younger. She was in her 40s and he was in his early 20s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they dated for quite a while. But when she came back, she bought a house. I was in my young adulthood at that point. I was working in New York City. I actually had a sort of ill-fated marriage myself at that point. But yeah, so it's hard. It's not that I don't remember much, but I think I was more focused on my own life at that point. But one of the things that I do remember about that time, when I wasn't married, so in my sort of early 20s up through like say 25, is that my mom and I were like girlfriends, and we would go out to nightclubs and dance and drink and meet men. And at the time, it seemed very, very exciting and fun. But in hindsight, I don't think it was very healthy.
Why do you think it's not healthy?
I don't know. I mean, it was that enmeshment, I think, that I talk about, where I didn't really know who I was. And I think she didn't maybe know who she was. And we were relying on each other in a way that wasn't healthy.
Sometimes mom needs to be mom and not the best friend.
Exactly. And then she struggled a little bit financially at that point. She had her college degree, and she was had worked in various places and whatnot. But I don't think it was easy to be alone the way she was.
Was she alone for the rest of her life?
In 1994, I met my now husband. We'll actually be married 25 years in September. And it was interesting because right around the time we announced that we were getting married, which was in early 1997, she met a guy and they decided to get married. and she actually wanted to have a joint wedding.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So you can see kind of what I'm talking about here. And at the time I was still, and I think I talk about this in the book a little bit. I was still very much in need of my mother's approval and her validation. And I still was very, I couldn't see myself outside of what she thought of me, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I was, in my 30s at that point, I didn't know who I was. Mm. I did know enough to know that we weren't going to have a joint marriage or a joint wedding. So they got married 6 months after we did, and they are still together, although that relationship has not been a good one. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it was as I started to come more into my own in my, late 30s, early 40s, and really starting to separate myself without knowing that that's what I was doing from her. It seemed that any time that I had something going good in my life, she would become more upset and angry. I did think at one point that I would never speak to her again, because at the end of 2010, my very first book was coming out. I was self-publishing a book based on a blog that I used to write. And she sent me an email and she said that she was disappointed in the person that I'd become. So, yeah, that was, and I will never forget it. It was as I said, the very end of 2010. And I wrote back and I said, well, based on that, I don't think I ever want to see you again. Mm-hmm. Please don't contact me again. Mm-hmm. And then a few days later, I was talking to my dad, and I told him what had happened, and he told me some stories about their marriage back, from this early 60s, that he had never been willing to tell me before. He was a very polite, he was a gentleman, and he didn't want to disparage her to me, but he told me some stories. And then here's the shocking part. That night he had a massive heart attack and died.
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry.
No, but it was a time. It was a real time in my life for sure. And I know I still get chills when I think about like the fact that maybe that morning he knew on some level, like something, like he needed to share this stuff with me.
Did these things help you in healing?
Yes, it was still several years, of no contact with my mom. Although at that point is when I also started becoming more involved in my life to help take care of her. Mm-hmm. And I needed to be in contact with my mom and her siblings. So, it was just a very surface kind of, I would just the facts of what's going on there. But I didn't really have much of a relationship with my mom at that point until she sent me a letter one day and she said, "What are you going to do to fix this?" And at that point, I was, this was in 2014-ish, and I was doing the life coaching thing at that point. And I was just starting to have contact with my mom again, and I'm doing this life coaching thing and getting certifications and having to come up with programs. And I started to build this practice coaching women who have difficult mothers. So it's been very much a work in progress since then.
But you are in touch now with her.
Yes.
And it was in your signature, in your email signature. What is the quote? I don't know where I wrote it, but it says something about you have to guide your relationship with your mom.
Well, I mean, you don't have to. The way I talk about my work has evolved over time. And what I see is that, so some adult daughters don't want to, and it's their best choice to not have contact or, a relationship with their moms. But for women who do, but, struggle and like aren't really sure what they, how can they maintain a relationship and have healthy boundaries, right? That's where the leadership comes in, right? And being willing to go first and do certain things that maybe never happened in the relationship before, right? With each generation, we have access to tools and wisdom and knowledge that our mothers didn't. And right. And 50 years from now, right, the younger generations will have access that we don't have. Right. So it is being willing to go first and being the leader in the relationship. Yeah. If that's what you want.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Karen, let's jump into learning. Is there anything else about her life you'd like to share? I feel like this is a good place to jump into what you feel you've learned from her and from this relationship.
Well, as I said, and I wrote this down when you emailed me. I said, one of the things is to do bold, spirited, unexpected, and perhaps unethical things in order to get what you want. So I learned that from her. And what's interesting to me is that what I do now in the world, right? Podcasts, coaching, workshops, speaking out, writing books, is bold and spirited and, unexpected maybe in this particular, it's not, there are a lot of people who've written about, mother-daughter relationships, and it's happening more and more and more. But I like to think that the way that I do it, right, is because of, I had my mother as an example. So yeah, that, and to not be afraid of traveling by yourself, which I loved, and to be adventurous with food and cooking. One of the things that she did when I was, in middle school and high school, she and my stepdad would host parties at our house with other couples, and they would pick a theme or a cuisine, from a different country or different ethnic cultures. And they would go all in and they would do all this research and throw these wild parties with all authentic food from wherever it was that they had decided that they were going to do it. And the different liqueurs and drinks and desserts and decorations. So yeah, being adventurous with food and cooking, although I'm kind of tired of cooking, to be honest, these days. But, for a while there, that was something that I also very much enjoyed.
Karen, let's go back to lessons. Did we cover what you feel you've learned from her? Is there more? Or should we talk about things she did not teach you, something you wish she was able to teach you?
Yeah, I'm looking at the email that I sent you, and one of the things I wrote that she unintentionally taught me was to hate my body and to shame myself. Shame is a legacy in my maternal lineage, and I'm not alone. I think there's many women walking around with shame. I feel like it's worth mentioning that is something that mothers teach their daughters, not on purpose, or maybe slightly on purpose. It's what I've come to realize is that mothers will shame their daughters as a way to keep them safe. So don't wear too short of a skirt. I'll just use the language, right? You're being slutty. That's inappropriate, or you'll get the wrong attention. Rather than, what we hear now more, right, is let's teach boys, right, boys and girls, that it doesn't really matter what a girl is wearing. Or in my case, my mother and my grandmother, for that matter, thought that my body was too big. And so I was constantly put on diets, and my grandmother tried to pay me to lose weight. And I think in their minds, the safety in that was she needs to be thinner so she can attract a man who will take care of her. Even in this day and age, right, where I could have had a job and lived perfectly fine on my own, in the back of the mother's mind is, she'll be cast out of the tribe and she will die if she's not okay, if she's not, doesn't fall into the narrow band of acceptability that's, defined by whoever for women. So that's that like shaming to protect and to keep so we can stay close to resources. I feel like it's important to call that out, that's, I think, why in most cases where there's a lot of shaming that happens, it's for that reason.
Mm-hmm. This beautifully connects to what you mentioned as something she did not teach you. Because you said that this is the second point, that women are punished if they don't conform to the norms of the culture.
Right. Yes.
That you wish she taught you that. And that women are just not valued for equality, for being equal.
Right. I mean, and that's, that's why I was saying sort of in the beginning of the conversation that the difficult mother-daughter relationship happens in the context of that, of women not being considered equal. There is one quick story I will tell where this was her, sort of bold and unexpected thing that happened when I was, I guess, maybe about 13 or 14 years old. It was unexpected. It was like, I wanted more of this. I had a top that had spaghetti straps, so you wouldn't wear a bra underneath it. And at the time, I didn't, as much as it's funny when I look back at pictures of myself, I'm like, my body was fine. I don't know why they thought I needed to lose weight. But anyway, I would wear this top and my mom was fine with it. But we were going to be traveling to Missouri, which is where my stepfather's family is and that's where he was from. And she didn't think that they would like it if I wore a top without a bra. And so what she did was she made the straps thicker. She sewed, she was a seamstress as well. And she like sort of altered this top so that I could wear a bra underneath it. In so doing, she kind of told me, she's like, I think this is really ridiculous. I think you'd be fine without it, but just to be on the safe side. And I appreciated that she didn't shame me in that moment where she could have easily, but she did many other times, but in that moment, there was something there that was, it's a very positive memory for me.
Instead of shaming you, she protected you.
She protected me without the shame.
Exactly.
Yes. She's a remarkable person.
Aren't all women?
And to this day, we still struggle. And she, we were talking before about narrative and how we tell stories intentionally so that we aren't casting ourselves as victims, right? And I have a very particular, very intentional thought that I like to remind myself with my mom, and that it is that she has a tendency to be cruel, and it can come in a moment. I mean, as early, as recently as last year, she said some very cruel things to me, and it's sort of like, okay, duly noted. This is mom, and it is still something that's hard to hear. So when I said before, the intentional thought, the way I used to think about it when I considered myself her victim, which I very much did for a long time, right? I used to think she's out to get me. She's this terrible person. She's mean to me. That's kind of how I used to think. And now my thought is she has a tendency to be cruel. So and that works for me, but it doesn't keep me in the victim position, right? It's just it's knowledge. I mentioned earlier, that her father had said, when she flunked out of college, that it was because she majored in bridge boys, and that was a story that he would tell to anyone who would listen, and it shamed her. And I know that that cruelty that she then can take that out and say things like that to me. I see it now. I see it as this, that's this internalized, self-loathing and shame that she hasn't learned to deal with, it's the way I like to say is, this is something I get to do, right? I get to have this woman as my mother, and I get to learn from it, and I get to, I don't know what I was going to say.
Get to heal.
Yes, I get to heal. I get to experience this. I get to, I have, it's a challenge at times. Not always laughing. Sometimes I cry, but I can't imagine not doing it.
Yeah. Karen, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
Oh, thank you. I'm just amazed and grateful for the work you're doing as well.
Oh, thank you. Can you help me just to recap very quickly for the end of our conversation what we talked about? We talked about your beautiful, beautiful book, Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters. And we talked about your mom, Cynthia, and things you feel you learned from her, which are to be bold and spirited and unexpected. And to not be afraid of traveling by yourself. I love that one. To be adventurous with food and cooking. And here we talked about why food matters, what it really means to us. But also to hate your body and shame yourself, to be ashamed of yourself. And this led us into things she was not able to teach me. And as that, you mentioned that the society actually doesn't value women equally, and that it punishes women when they don't conform to the norms.
Yeah.
I think this is most of the most important lessons we covered. Is there something you'd like to add?
No, there's probably always something I could add, but at this point, I think we have really covered it all.
Wonderful. Karen, thank you again. And here's to us doing a workshop together.
It's done. Let's just, in our minds, it's done.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Tider, that's TAJDER. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.